Nell Fenby was 15 the morning her hair froze to the bolster. She woke and could not turn her head. A rope of her own brown hair had frozen fast to the ticking in the night. She did not cry out. She never did. She worked her fingers loose, and her fingers would not close because the chilblains had split them open at the knuckle. Then she broke the skin of ice on the chamber pot with her elbow, and she went down the back stair in the dark to lay the fires that would warm every soul in that house but her own. There were 4 of them up in that attic. 4 maids, 2 to a bed, their outdoor cloaks laid over the blankets, because the blankets alone were a joke against that cold. And when the new housekeeper carried a warming pan up the servants' stair to give them one warm night, the old one stopped her. Stopped her in front of the whole servants' hall. 9 people stood watching. And Mrs. Gaunt said it plain, the way you'd state a law of God. Warm servants turn idle. That night, I did not argue. I went to the steward's room and I opened the house accounts to a page that no one had ever crossed. And I began to add, if you believe quiet people read the fine print, this story is for you. Before I go on, do one small thing for me. Subscribe so the next chapter finds you. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. I like to know how far a cold winter can travel. Now let me take you back to the start of it. The winter of 1860 came down early on the North Riding, and it came down hard. I remember the road up to Ashcombe Hall was already rutted with ice when the carrier set me down at the gate with my box. I was 52 years old that autumn. I had kept other people's houses warm for 40 years, and I had never once owned a hearth of my own. My name is Hannah Alderly, and I had just been hired as housekeeper of a great house I had never seen. I want you to understand who I was, because it matters to everything that came after. I began in service at 12. My first place had an attic much like the one you'll come to know, and in that attic I shared a bed with a girl named Alice, who was 13. We slept back to back for the warmth of it, all one hard winter. By the spring Alice was dead. A fever, they said, and they were right, but a fever is only the thing that finds a body the cold has already opened. I have never forgotten how light she was when they carried her down. I promised myself a great many things, standing at the bottom of that stair. I have kept most of them. So I was not a soft woman, whatever else I was. I did not weep easily, and I did not beg. I had learned young that pity moves nobody, and that tears cost you the one thing a servant cannot spare, which is the appearance of being useful. What I had instead was arithmetic. I kept accounts better than any land agent I ever met, and I kept them honest. And I had watched more than one grand household discover, too late, that its money had been leaking out of a hole nobody had thought to measure. Numbers, I believed, would move people that feeling never could. That belief was the making of me, and it very nearly was the ruin of me, too. But I'll come to that. Ashcombe Hall stood grey and long against a grey sky. Lady Adela Ashcombe was newly settled there, a sensible widow of good sense and, I would learn, no cruelty in her at all, only a great trust in the men who kept her figures. She received me kindly in a warm morning room, gave me the keys, and told me she wished the house run with economy and order. I said she should have both. I meant it. Then I went to learn my house, the way I always did, from the top down. I climbed to the female servants' attic on my second morning, before the girls were up from their day's work, so I could see the place as it truly was. I have seen a great many cold rooms. I had not seen one like that in 30 years. The slates were bare over your head. You could put your hand up and feel the outside of the world through them. On the inside of the little dormer window, the frost had grown thick and grown into shapes, the way it does when a room never once gets warm enough to melt it back. Frost flowers, we used to call them as children. Ferns and feathers and stars of ice standing up off the glass on the inside. They were beautiful. I have never in my life hated a beautiful thing so much. Frost flowers on the inside of a window mean that no fire has touched that room and that no fire is coming. The 2 beds stood along the low wall. The chamber pots were frozen solid, one of them cracked from it. The girls' outdoor cloaks lay spread over the thin blankets because they had learned to wear their whole lives to bed. I stood there a moment in that white-breathing cold, and I was 12 years old again, and Alice was warm at my back, and then she wasn't. That was where I first saw Nell Fenby's hands. She had come up to fetch something, not expecting me, and she bobbed and hid her hands in her apron out of habit. I asked her, gently, to show me. She would not, at first. When she did, I understood the hiding. The chilblains had gone past red and into open cracks, and the cracks wept, and each morning the cold split them fresh before they could ever begin to heal. She could not properly close her fingers, and with those fingers she carried coal, and blacked grates, and wrung out cloths in freezing water, and made every room in that house warm enough for its betters. She was 15. She had a cough I did not like the sound of even then, low and wet and patient, the kind that settles in and waits. "How long have they been like this?" I asked her. "Since Martinmas, Mrs. Alderly," she said. "Martinmas is the 11th of November. It was not yet December. They come every winter. Mum, they go again in the spring." They go again in the spring. I thought of Alice, who had gone in the spring, in a different way. I did the only thing I could think to do that first cold week, which was a small thing and a foolish one, and I would do it again. That evening I took a warming pan from the kitchen, filled it with embers, and I carried it up the servants' stair to warm those beds, just the once, just for one night, so that 4 girls could sleep without their cloaks on for a single winter's night in a warm bed. I did not reach the stair. I want to tell you about Mrs. Honoria Gaunt, because you cannot understand that house without her. She was 6 years old. She had been housekeeper at Ashcombe for 30 years before me, and when age took the keys from her, she did not take herself off to a cottage as most do. She stayed. She was made companion to the old dowager, and she kept a chair in the servants' hall, and she kept, more to the point, the whole staff in the shape of her thumb. 30 years is a long reign. The girls had been trained by her. The footman had been trained by her. When Mrs. Gaunt spoke, the whole hall arranged itself around her voice, and I, the new woman, the outsider, had been there 11 days. She was standing at the foot of the stair, with the warming pan's glow lighting her face before I ever saw her. "And where?" she said. "Is that going?" "Up to the Maids," I said. "For the one night. Their pots are frozen through, Mrs. Gaunt. One of them can't close her hands." The hall had gone quiet behind me. I counted them later, the way I count everything. 9 people. 2 footmen, the cook, the kitchen maid, the 2 housemaids from the family floor, the boot boy, the coachman come in for his supper, and old Gaunt herself. 9 witnesses. She did not lower her voice for any of them. She raised it. "Put it back," she said. "A servant who sleeps warm rises slow. A servant who's a little cold rises quick and works to get her blood up. That is not cruelty, Mrs. Alderly, whatever your soft southern notions. That is how a house is kept." And then she said the thing I have carried in my chest ever since, the thing that ran that house like a text nailed over the door. Warm servants turn idle. 9 people heard her say it. Not one of them moved, because they had all heard it 100 times before, and they had all lived inside it, and to them it was simply the weather, simply the way of the world, a thing as fixed as the frost on the glass. I put the warming pan back. I want you to understand that. I did not throw it at her, though I have imagined it many a night since. I put it back on its hook, and I said, "As you say, Mrs. Gaunt," and I went to my room. Because I had learned, at 12, that the cold does not answer to feeling. It answers to fire, and fire answers to coal, and coal answers to the ledger, and the ledger was the one weapon in that house that was mine. The next morning Mr. Silas Reeve showed me exactly how the ledger saw the servants' floor. Reeve was the land agent, a dry, careful, upright man, and I'll say for him he was no thief and no bully, which in my experience makes a man more dangerous than either, because he cannot imagine himself doing wrong. His whole authority rested on his figures, and his figures were clean, and he was proud of them the way another man is proud of his sons. He kept the estate coal ledger. When I asked him how the coal was allotted through the house, he showed me the list, and he showed it to me as though it were a thing to admire. It was written out by rank. First, the staterooms and the great library, kept warm whether anyone sat in them or not, because a cold stateroom shamed the family before guests. Second, the family bedrooms and the morning room. Third, the offices, the kitchen, the steward's own room, and the servant's attic. The servant's floor was not third. It was not fourth. It was not on the page at all. There was no line for it. There was no figure against it. In 3 years of accounts, the coal that reached the female servant's attic was precisely nothing, entered nowhere, because you cannot enter a nothing, and so it had become. In the mind of every man who kept those books, not a cruelty, but simply a blank, a place outside the columns. "You'll find it all in order," Reeve told me, and he believed it, and by his own lights it was. I said nothing. I asked instead if I might read the household accounts back a few years, to learn the house, and he gave them to me gladly, glad to have a housekeeper who cared for the figures. And I sat down that week with 3 years of the books, and I read the lines for coal, and I read the lines for linen, and I read the lines for the doctor. And I thought nothing of them then. I want to be honest with you about that. I did not see it yet. I saw a set of numbers I would come to know better than my own name, and I turned the page, and I went on. The vault was already open in front of me. I simply had not yet learned to read it. December closed its fist on Ashcombe. And then came the morning I will not forget, the morning the whole thing stopped being private and became a public account, entered before witnesses, the kind of account that has to be closed before the same eyes that saw it opened. It was a killing cold. The worst of that whole bad winter, the sort of cold that stops the pump and kills the birds in the hedge. Nell had been stripping the beds on the family floor and remaking them with the best linen, the fine sheets Lady Adela kept for the good bedrooms. And her hands, her poor split hands, had cracked open worse than ever in that cold, and bled as they had bled all winter. Only this time they bled onto the linen. When the sheets came down to the wash, the housemaid held them up, and there across that fine white cloth were the marks of Nell's ruined hands. Not a smear. Prints, the clear print of a girl's fingers, opened to the bone by the cold, laid across sheets worth more money than she was paid in a year. Reeve was sent for. Gaunt was already there. And the whole hall gathered, because word of a spoiled thing runs through a house like fire. I stood at the side and I watched it done. Reeve held up the linen and named its cost out loud to the room. Then he ruled that the ruin of it would be docked from the maids' wages. Not Nell's alone. All four, for they shared the work and would share the loss. And then he said the thing that told me exactly what kind of winter lay ahead. He said that idle, sickly girls who could not do clean work were an expense a well-run house could not carry, and that the coming quarter day would see the staff looked at closely, and some of them, perhaps, turned off. And over all of it, at his shoulder, Mrs. Gaunt nodded. Slow and sure, as if the bleeding sheets were not the wound of it, but the proof of it. As if a girl bleeding onto the linen were simply what happened when you let a servant grow soft. Warm servants turn idle, her whole body said, though she did not need to say it again. The room already knew the text by heart. I looked at Nell. She did not cry either. She had her father's trick of it, or her mother's, that stillness. But her chin went down and her ruined hands went behind her back, and she took it, the docking and the shame and the threat, in front of every soul she worked beside. 15 years old, and made to stand as the reason the house might lose its maids, when the truth was upside down from that, the truth was exactly and entirely upside down, and I was the only one in that room who was going to be able to prove it. because you cannot argue a doctrine. I knew that. If I had stood up in that hall and cried out that it was cruel, that it was wicked, that the girl was bleeding, Gaunt would have smiled her thin smile and told the room that the soft new woman had soft new notions, and the room would have believed her. Because she had 30 years, and I had a month. Feeling was her ground. She had held it 30 years. I was not fool enough to fight her there. But there was other ground. There was ground she and Reeve had never once thought to defend, because they did not know it was ground at all. It was the ledger. And a ledger cannot be shamed, and cannot be argued with, and does not care one straw for 30 years of anybody's reign. A ledger only adds. That night I sat up with Nell. Her cough had turned in the cold, gone from that low wet patience into something that doubled her over and frightened me badly. I brought her down to my own room, which had a grate, and I lit it, and I sat her by it wrapped in my own blankets, and I listened to her breathe, and I thought about Alice, and I made up my mind. When she slept at last I lit a candle, and I fetched the account books, 3 winters of them, and I began to read the way I should have read the first time. Not to learn the house, to catch it out. I read the coal line, and the coal line for the servants' attic was, as I have told you, nothing at all. Nobody had ever spent a farthing to warm those girls. That was the saving, that was the thrift they were all so proud of. And I wrote at the top of a clean page, in my own hand, what that thrift came to. The whole attic wanted about £3 of coal a year to keep it decent. £3. In 30 years of Gaunt's careful rule, that came to £90 saved. £90. I set it down and I underlined it, and I thought, there is the whole of your doctrine in one clean figure. £90 over 30 years to keep the servants cold. Then I turned to the other columns, the ones I had glanced at and passed over. And this is the part I want you to sit with, because this is the whole turn of the thing. I read the linen line, and the linen line was a horror once you knew to read it. Sheets and shifts and cloths, ruined and replaced, winter after winter, cracked and bloodied and worn through by hands that could not be careful because they could not feel. 3 years of it. I began to add it up. It came to more than £50 in ruined linen in 3 winters alone. I read the doctor's line. Fees paid again and again for coughs and fevers and frost-bitten feet and the long, slow illnesses that a cold attic breeds in young bodies. 3 years of doctor's bills for the servants' floor, £24 and more. And then I read the line that broke it open for me. The line for hiring. Because a cold house does not keep its maids. A cold house buries some and loses the rest, and every spring and every Martinmas it must go down to the hiring fair and take on new girls, and pay to advertise, and pay the hiring, and board them and train them from nothing, only to lose them again the next hard winter. I counted the girls who had come and gone through that attic in 3 years. 9 of them. 9 maids, hired and trained and lost, had real money each time. I sat there in the candlelight, with the 2 figures in front of me, and the cold was coming up through the floor, and Nell was breathing rough in my bed, and I understood at last what I had walked into. It was not only cruel. Anyone with eyes could see it was cruel. What no one had seen, what no one had ever once sat down to count, was that it was also mad. It was bad arithmetic. They had saved £90 in coal across 30 years, and I had not yet finished totting up what the coal had cost them in the same house, and I could already see it was going to be more. Far more. They were burning the girls to save the coal, and the girls cost more than the coal, and no one, in 3 years of clean and careful books, had ever crossed the 2 columns and read them against each other. Because the servants' floor was outside the ledger, the same way it was outside the flue. It was a blank, a nothing, a place the arithmetic did not reach, and so the arithmetic had never caught them, and so they had gone on year after year, sincerely believing that cold was thrift. The flue, that was the next thing, and I found it 2 days later with Jacob Ridley. Jacob was the estate carpenter, a slow, honest, wide-handed man who had been at Ashcombe most of his life. I had marked him early as the one man in the place who could not tell a lie without his ears going red. I asked him, quiet, whether there had ever been a chimney to the female servant's attic, because a room built like that, under the slates, ought to have had a little grate once. Most of them did. He looked at me a long moment. Then he took me up himself, with a candle, and he showed me the place in the low wall where a small grate had once stood, and behind it, where the flue should have run up clean to the open sky, someone had stopped it, bricked it, filled the throat of that chimney with brick and rubble and mortared it shut, so that even had a girl found coal and lit a fire, the smoke would have had nowhere to go, and she'd have choked before she'd have warmed. "When was this done, Jacob?" I asked him. "Long back, Mum," he said, "lo, afore my time as carpenter. I mind the fire in this grate when I were a lad, drawing sweet. Then one year it was stopped, and we was told it drew bad, and smoked the room, and after that the coal for up here stopped and all." He ran his big thumb along the old mortar. "But it never did smoke, Mum. I mind it drawing sweet." "I do. Someone had ordered that flue bricked up. Deliberately, to save the coal a working grate would burn. Someone had decided in this house 30 years back or near it that the cheapest thing to do with 4 girls in an attic was to wall up their only chance of a fire and call it thrift, and then write a doctrine over it so the whole house would keep it for them. And I stood in that frozen room with the candle throwing our shadows up onto the bare slates, and the frost flowers glittering on the inside of the dormer glass, and I thought I knew already whose order it had been. But knowing is not proving. And I had learned, at 12, standing at the bottom of a different stair, that in a great house it is not the truth that wins, it is the proof. So I did not go to Lady Idella and tell her a cruel tale. Feeling was Gaunt's country, and I would not fight her there. I went back down to the steward's room, and I opened the household book to that clean page where I had written £90, and beside it I began, at last, to make the tally that no one in that house had ever been asked to make. Coal saved on one side, everything the cold had cost on the other, linen, doctors, 9 lost maids, and the price of the next 9. I did not have the whole of it yet. I did not have the last figure, the one that would close it, and I did not yet have the flue named to the one who gave the order, and Lady Day was months off, and between here and there stood Reeve with his threat of dismissals, and Gaunt with her 30 years, and a winter that had not finished with us. But I had the page, and I had begun to add, and downstairs, unknowing, sleeping the sleep of the righteous, were 3 people who kept every figure in that great house, and had never once crossed the only 2 columns that mattered. I trimmed the candle. Nell coughed in her sleep, and I turned to the next line and went on adding. I finished the page 3 nights later. It was near 2 in the morning, and my candle was down to a stub, and Nell was coughing that dry, tearing cough 2 floors above me. But I had the last figure. I had crossed the 2 columns at last. £90. That was the coal, all of it, 30 years of a saved fire in the Maids' attic at £3 a year. £90, exact, and against it 3 winters, only 3, because that was all the books I had. £58 in ruined household linen, 24 in the doctor's fees, 44 to advertise and hire at Martinmas, and board and train the 9 girls who had come to this house and gone again, worn out or frightened off or carried off. £126. In 3 years. I sat with it a long while. I did not feel triumphant. I felt cold and old, and I thought of Alice, who had shared my bed when I was 12, and who the spring took. Nobody had ever added Alice up either. Then I closed the book, and I did a thing I had no leave to do. I went to find Jacob Ridley. He was at his bench in the grey of the next morning, planing an oak board, the curls of it coming off pale and sweet. He was an Ashcombe man to the bone, 60 if he was a day, and he had known this house longer than Gaunt had ruled it. "Jacob," I said, "I want the attic flue opened, and I want that ceiling boarded and lime-washed, and one small grate set in, and I want it done this week." He set down his plane. He looked at me a good while. "Mister, Reeve won't have sanctioned that." "No," I said. "He hasn't. It's on my word. Housekeeper's authority, the household side of the house. If it's answered for, I'll answer for it, and you did the work I told you to do. That's all." He wiped his hands slow on his apron. And then something in his face eased, the way a man's face eases when he's been asked, at last, to do the thing he always thought was right. "That flue drew sweet," he said. "I've told you. It was stopped by order. Not because it smoked. I know it. Open it." He did. It took him and his lad the better part of 2 days. They knocked out the bricks behind the low wall, and a cold breath of 30 years came out of it, sour and dead, and then it cleared, and the drawer came back as clean as he'd promised. They boarded the bare slates over. They lime-washed the boards till the room went from a black cave to something near white, and they set a small iron grate in the cold hearth that had never in living memory held a coal. I laid the first fire in it myself. I would not let Nell do it, though she wanted to. She stood there with her split hands wrapped in rag, watching me, the other 3 behind her, Bessie and Susan and Marion, all of them not quite believing. I struck the light. The kindling caught. The flame ran up, and the new limed walls threw it back, and for the first time in 30 years there was a fire burning in the female servants' attic of Ashcombe Hall. Nell began to cry then, not from the cough. She put her ruined hands up over her face and cried, and I let her, and I did not say a soft word, because a soft word was Gaunt's country, and I would not fight her there even in kindness. I just banked the coal and watched it take. "Warm yourselves," I said, "and then to your work. You'll find you do it better." That was the 50th part of it, the turn. Everything before had been me reading. This was me acting, and there is no unringing that bell. Reeve found out in 9 days. He came to the steward's room with the coal book open in his hand and his face the colour of tallow. He was a narrow man, Silas Reeve, all made of columns, and he set the book on my table as if he were laying down evidence. "There is coal gone to the servants' attic," he said. "A grate. Set without my order. Boarding lime, a carpenter's 2 days. Explain it." "I set it," I said. I did not rise. "On housekeeping authority. The maids were sickening in an unheated room and ruining the linen you then docked from their wages. I judged the fire cheaper than the ruin. I still judge so." "You judged." He said the word like it soiled him. "You are the housekeeper. You keep the still room and the linen press. You do not order works against the estate's coal without the agent's hand to it. This is irregular expenditure, Mrs. Alderly. It will be charged against your own wages. And you will answer for it at the Lady Day quarter accounts before her ladyship on the 25th of March. And if her ladyship finds against you, you will be turned off this house with the reckoning." "I understand you," I said. He waited. I think he wanted me to plead, to weep, or to beg the charge down, or to say I'd meant no harm. That was the shape of the woman he expected. I gave him none of it. "Was there anything else, Mr. Reeve?" His mouth went thin. He took up his book and went, and Gaunt went to work above me. I heard of it the way you hear of weather. She sat with Lady Adela of an afternoon, being her companion, being the wise old head of 30 years, and she let fall, soft as ash, that the new housekeeper was spoiling the staff. Warming them. Coddling girls who'd been bred to hardship. That warm servants turn idle, my lady, as they always have. And here was the proof of it, a new woman come in, and the whole floor gone soft in a fortnight. I did not go up and defend myself. I want you to understand that. Every part of me that was still 12 years old, standing at the bottom of a strange stair, wanted to run up and cry out that it was cruel, it had always been cruel. But crying it was exactly what Gaunt wanted, because in a battle of feeling she had 30 years and the dowager's ear, and I had a fortnight. I would not fight her on that ground. I did two colder things instead. First, I wrote a memorandum, plain, dated, in my own clear hand, that the unheated state of the female servant's attic was, in my judgment as keeper of the household accounts, costing this estate more in ruined linen, doctors' fees, and the constant rehiring of worn-out maids than the coal it saved, that I had therefore ordered the flue reopened and one grate lit, that I gave this warning in writing so that it should stand on record. I carried it to Reeve myself, and I made Jacob Ridley stand by while I laid it on his desk. So there should be a witness that the warning was given and the day it was given on. Reeve read it. "You think a deal of your own arithmetic," he said. "I think a deal of yours, Mr. Reeve. I've been reading it 3 winters. That's the trouble." He did not answer that. But he kept the memorandum. A columns man cannot make himself throw away a paper. The second cold thing took longer. I gathered the proof. I went through the linen invoices and drew out every sheet and bolster case ruined by blood and rot from cold, cracked hands, and I priced them. £58 over 3 winters. I went to the receipted doctor's bills, the man's own signature on them, girl after girl seen for chilblains gone bad, for chest fevers, for the whitlow that took the top of a maid's finger 2 winters gone. £24. And I went to the Martinmas hiring accounts, the 11th of November of each year, and there they were, the advertisements, the fair day fees, the board and the train of 9 girls in 3 years who'd come and not lasted. £44. And then I did the thing that I knew, when I did it, was the nail. I walked down to the parish church and I opened the burial register and I found the girl. A maid of this house, buried 3 winters back, 16 years old, dead of a fever in the cold months. Her name written plain in the register. I copied it out. I did not weep over it. I copied it, with the date, the way you copy a figure into a ledger. Because that was a cost too. The house had never entered her anywhere. All this while, the fire did its quiet work upstairs, and nobody above the servants' floor saw it. The girls slept. That was the first thing. 4 girls who'd slept 2 to a bed under their own outdoor cloaks now slept warm, and you could see it come back into their faces by the day. The linen stopped tearing, because Nell's hands were healing, the splits closing over, the weeping stopping. And Nell's cough, that dry tearing cough that had frightened me down to my boots, began to loosen. It came up soft and wet now, which is a thing you want, and then it began to go. Once it near went wrong. Gaunt came up. She climbed the attic stair one afternoon, 66 years old and slow with it, but still climbing, to inspect, the way she still inspected the whole house, though she ruled none of it. I was on the landing with an armful of pressed sheets. She stopped at the attic door and she looked in, and she saw the grate, and she saw the coal in it burning, and she went very still. So, she said. "It's true then, it's true," I said. She looked at the fire a long time. And I stood there with my sheets and my heart, going hard, because if she went straight to Lady Adela in a fury, before I had my page ready, before Lady Day, before I could lay the 2 columns side by side, she might carry it on feeling alone. 30 years against a fortnight. She could still win it that way. But she didn't go. She looked at the fire, and something crossed her face I could not read, and she said, low, almost to herself, "I stopped that flue myself." I said nothing. I had suspected it, and here she was saying it, but I had no witness to it, and it would not do to grab. "To save the coal," she said. £3 a year. 30 years I saved this house that coal. She turned to me. "And you'll be turned off for it come Lady Day." "You know that." "We'll see at Lady Day," I said. She went down. She did not report the fire that afternoon. I have thought since that she did not report it because she was so certain of Reeve's charge already standing that she thought she had no need. She thought the reckoning was hers before it was called. And so the winter turned, and Lady Day came. They called it in the steward's room on the morning of the 25th of March. Lady Adela sat at the head of the table, sensible and grave, newly enough come to this house that she still trusted the men who kept its figures. Reeve sat at her right with the coal ledger open before him. Gaunt stood by the fire, warming her hands at a grate she never once thought to wonder the cost of, and that was the whole matter of it, standing there in one woman. I came in with my household book under my arm. I set it on the table, and I stood. "Mrs. Alderly," said Lady Idella, "there's a charge of irregular expenditure, a fire lit in the servants' attic, works done, coal drawn, all without Mr. Reeve's order. He's laid it against your wages, and I'm told," a small glance at Gaunt, "that the staff have been softened by it. I'll hear you, and then I'll decide." "Lay out your figure, Mr. Reeve," I said. "Let's have it plain first." He was glad to. He read it out. The extra coal to the attic grate since I lit it, the carpenter's 2 days, the boarding, the lime, a few pounds all told, set against my wages, and past it the graver thing, the breach, the housekeeper who ordered works over the agent's head. He read it in his columns man's voice, and every figure of it was true. "Every figure of that is true," I said when he'd done. "I don't dispute a penny. Now I'll read you the other page. The one nobody in this house has ever crossed." I opened my book. "Mr. Reeve keeps the coal saved. It's an honest figure and I'll grant it him whole. The attic fire, when it burned, took £3 of coal a year. It's burned 30 years unlit, near enough. 30 years at £3. £90 saved. Say it loud. £90. That's the whole of the thrift. That's what the coal was worth to this house." Reeve nodded. Once, he could not help it. It was his own figure. "Now the other column. I've only 3 winters of the books, so it's only 3 winters I can price. The rest is lost, and I'll come to what was lost. 3 winters." I read it slow. "Ruined household linen, the best sheets among it, torn and blooded and rotted from hands cracked open by the cold. £58. Here are the invoices. I laid them out. The doctor. Girl after girl seen for chilblains gone to the bone, for chest fever, for a finger lost to a whitlow. His own bills, his own hand to them. £24. I laid those out too. And the hiring. 9 maids this house has taken on and worn out and lost in 3 years. The Martinmas fair fees, the advertising, the board and the training of 9 girls, one after another, because a warm house keeps its servants and a cold one buys them fresh every winter. £44. I put my hand flat on the page. 58 and 24 and 44. £126 in 3 winters. The room was very quiet. I heard the fire. "Cold was never thrift, my lady," I said. "It is the most expensive thing this house has ever bought. £90 to keep them 30 years, or 126 to lose them for 3. And then I stopped, and I let the silence do the work, because I had learned that a figure spoken and left alone does more than any amount of pleading. Reeve moved first. I had known he would. He was a columns man, and I had convicted him with columns, and there is no defence against your own instrument. His finger came down onto his own ledger, and it began to track down the column. The coal saved, and I watched it go, and I watched it reach the bottom, and I watched his lips move on the total he had kept 100 times, and never once set against another page. He had all these figures. Every one I'd read was already in his books somewhere. The linen was his. The doctor was his. The hiring was his. He had only never crossed them. "These are," he said, and stopped. "These are the estate's own figures." "Every one," I said. "I found none of them." "You wrote them all. I only added them together." He sat back. He did not argue. A man like Reeve, when the arithmetic goes against him, cannot argue, because the arithmetic is the whole of what he is. He looked at his own book as if it had turned in his hand. Then Gaunt. She came off the fire. "This is a clever woman's trick, my lady," she said, but her voice had not the iron it always had. "Figures can be marched any way you please. I ran this house 30 years on the plain truth of it. Warm servants turn idle. It was true when I was housekeeper, and it's true now, and no column of hers. Who stopped the flue, Mrs. Gaunt?" She stopped. "The attic chimney," I said. It drew sweet once. Jacob Ridley will stand to that it drew sweet and was bricked up by order, not for smoking. Somebody in this house ordered 4 girls only fire walled up 30 years back, and wrote a doctrine over it so the whole house would keep it and never ask. Who gave that order? She did not answer. But she had answered it to me herself on the attic landing, and I think she saw in my face that I knew, and that Jacob knew the flue, and that between the two it would stand. "You stopped it," I said gently, because now I could afford to be gentle. "To save £3 a year. And I've just read you what the £3 cost." And then I turned the last paper to the light, and I slid it across to Lady Adela. "There's one figure I couldn't price, my lady. This house never entered it anywhere, so I went to the parish to find it. A maid of Ashcombe, 3 winters gone. 16 years old. Buried in the cold months of a fever the cold bred. That's her name, from the burial register in the parish clerk's hand. Lady Adela took the paper. She turned it to the window, and she read the girl's name aloud, slow, into the quiet room, a name nobody at that table had thought of in 3 years. She set it down. She looked at Reeve, and Reeve had no column for it. She looked at Gaunt, and Gaunt had no doctrine that could stand next to a child's name read out plain. And she looked, last, at me. "You gave a written warning," she said. "Mr. Reeve, is that so? A memorandum that the cold cost more than the coal?" "She did," said Reeve, low, "in November, with the carpenter by. So this was set down before this day. Not conjured to save your own place. She was not asking me, she was settling it in her own mind. It was set down, I said, because I wanted it on record whichever way today went." Lady Adela was quiet a moment. Then she gave her judgment, and she gave it plain, and she gave it before the same faces that had watched the wages docked and the girls threatened, which was the whole of what I'd wanted, that it should close before the eyes it opened before. "The fire stays," she said. "The charge against Mrs. Alderly's wages is struck. The expenditure falls to the estate, where it belongs. Mr. Reeve, you'll rewrite the coal allocation, and you'll write the servant's floor onto the page by need, not by rank. And the docking from the maid's wages for the ruined linen is returned to them, all 4, in full." She looked at Gaunt. "And I'll hear no more of idle servants under this roof, Mrs. Gaunt. I've just been shown what the plain truth of it actually costs." Gaunt's hand had left the mantle. She stood in the middle of the room with nothing to hold and nothing to say, 30 years gone out from under her in the reading of a column and a name. She did not speak the creed again. Not there. Not ever. Where I could hear it, there was no shouting in it, no one struck the table. It was only a book laid open, and a total read aloud, and a girl's name in the light. But it turned the house. The cherry of it came weeks after, and I'll give it you because it's the sweetest small thing in the whole account. Reeve came to my door. He came with the corrected quarter accounts under his arm, and he stood there stiff as a post, because he could no longer square his own book alone. The servant's floor was on the page now, and it changed his totals, and he could not make it balance without the household side, without me. "Mrs. Alderly," he said, "I can't reconcile the quarter without your linen and still room figures. I'll need them worked in." I had my tea in my hand. I did not hurry over it. "You'll have them, Mr. Reeve," I said. "Gladly, on the one condition. The servants' floor stays on the page. Every quarter, from here on, coal, linen, doctor, the lot of it, crossed against each other, where a body can read them together." He looked at me. And then, God help him, something almost like respect went over that narrow face. "It stays on the page," he said. "Then come in," I said. "The tea's hot." And he did. And we squared the quarter together, his columns and mine, crossed for the first time in the history of that house. I'll leave you at Martinmas. A year on, near enough. The 11th of November again, hiring day, when servants give their notice and go to the fair to be taken on elsewhere. Go up to the attic first. It's sealed now, boarded and limed, white as a dairy. There's a small grate in the corner and a coal glowing red in it, low and steady. And on the inside of the dormer glass, where 30 winters had grown their frost flowers thick as fern every night, there's nothing. Clear glass. You can see the moor through it. I stood at that window last week, and I could not find one flower of frost, and I have never in my life been so glad to see plain cold glass. Nell Fenby sits by that grate of an evening, with fine linen in her lap, darning it small and neat with hands that healed clean over the summer. Her chest is quiet. That tearing cough is a year gone. She's a woman grown now, near enough, and she can close her hands. And here's the figure I'll close on, the one that started this whole account. Martinmas came. The hiring fair came, and of the 4 maids in that attic, Nell and Bessie and Susan and Marion, not one gave her notice. Not one went to the fair to be taken on elsewhere. 4 girls stayed, in a house that used to lose 3 a winter. I sat on the servants' stair that evening, warmed myself for the first time in a working life of 40 years of keeping other people's houses warm. And I held the 2 houses side by side in my mind, the way I'd held the 2 columns. The house that walls up a fire to save £3 and buys 9 new girls to bury or wear out, and the house that keeps them. The arithmetic was decided. It had always been decided. It only wanted somebody to add it up. Reeve keeps the servants' floor on the page, every quarter. He's never once tried to take it off. And Gaunt sits with the old dowager still, and warms her hands at her fire, and she has never said those words again where I could hear them. Warm servants turn idle. She was wrong for 30 years, and it cost this house £126 in 3 winters alone that we could count, and a girl in the parish register we couldn't. Here's the whole of it, the thing I've carried since I was 12 and stood at the bottom of a strange cold stair. The people who keep a great house warm are the very last that anyone thinks to warm, and a house is ruled, in the end, from below, from the still room and the linen press and the servants' stair, because the women who lay every fire in it now owe their own warmth to the one who finally crossed the columns. I trimmed the lamp. Nell's darning needle caught the firelight. And upstairs, for the first winter in 30 years, 4 girls slept warm. If you've a house you keep warm for others, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this story travels.